In 2013, Stephen Harper's Conservatives voted to repeal Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act. That's the censorship provision that made it an offense to hurt someone's feelings, or actually, even worse, it made it an offense to potentially cause one person to have hard feelings about another person. The language really is that vague. It really was a feelings crime, a thought crime, not even a word crime. Here's the text of the now repealed Section 13. It was illegal to publish anything, including on the internet, that, quote, is likely to expose a person or persons to hatred or contempt. So that created the counterfeit human right not to be offended, which of course that's not a real thing. What that really was government power, the power to silence you, masquerading as a human right. That odious law was finally repealed in 2013, but now Justin Trudeau's Liberals are looking to bring it back. They're studying this at Parliament's Justice Committee right now. And to my horror, Andrew Scheer's Conservatives haven't lifted a finger against it. They just haven't. They're not actively cheering it on that I can see. But they have made a team decision, a party-wide decision, specifically not to champion freedom of speech. I can't name a more important issue for Conservatives, actually. It's more important than taxes or immigration or fighting terrorism or respecting our military. It's more important than any trade deal, more important than criminal justice, because if you don't have free speech, you can't talk meaningfully about any of those other issues. So it's so clear to me. The Liberal government, really any government, it's not just Liberals, all politicians, they don't like their critics, but the Liberals in particular are seeking to shut down criticism of them on key political issues, especially immigration, by the way. They're looking to silence speech that isn't governed by our criminal code. I'm fine with our criminal code generally. But they're looking to silence legitimate political criticism under this hurt feelings law because it's easier to shut someone up than debating them. Here's a mashup of Justin Trudeau and Ahmed Hassan, the immigration minister, both of them personally attacking us here at The Rebel, for example, reading word for word the same talking points, claiming that we're fake news that ought to be condemned.
It is disappointing to see the Conservatives and the member opposite engage in peddling rebel media conspiracy theories.
It is disappointing to see the Conservatives engage in peddling rebel media conspiracy theories.
It is disappointing
to see the Conservatives
engage in peddling
rebel media
conspiracy theories.
Now, normally I'd be flattered by that. I have no problem with politicians bad-mouthing me, feelings mutual. It's a sign that we at The Rebel are not bought and paid for, like, say, the CBC, who seem to specialize in sending female reporters on first date-style walk-and talks with Trudeau, where they ask really tough questions like this.
Last book you've read or the book you're reading?
Just finished the Patch, which was Chris Turner's history of the oil patch. But I'm also about to start the new Ken Follett, the third book that is the sequel to Pillars of the Earth.
That's your nerdy side.
That's my.
Your sci-fi nerdy side.
No, it's not sci-fi. It's just a sweeping historical epic, I'm sure, but I haven't started it yet. So,
what kind of music are you listening to right now? If you have time, or podcasts. Podcasts?
No, I don't. I've tried. I run regularly, and I've tried to do the podcast thing, but it hasn't really. It doesn't really. I don't like people talking in my ears when I'm trying to run. I like to sort of vibe out.
Yeah, I'd rather be hated by Justin Trudeau than to be his concubine. But the problem is that Trudeau isn't just arguing with us here. He's not just condemning us here. He wants to ban us. He and his point person on the job, Karina Gould, have made it crystal clear they want to silence Trudeau's enemies, not to debate us. This was first told to Facebook directly by Trudeau, to their chief operating officer, Sheryl Sandberg, that if Facebook didn't silence critics like us in the run-up to the election, Trudeau would force them to. Remember, he used that phrase, fake news. That's what he calls anyone who disagrees with him, and he's now demanding that social media companies comply with him. Trudeau met with other censors in Paris recently, Emmanuel Macron, the hated president of France, who's really at war with his own people, and Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, who has been revealed recently to be beholden to Chinese interests and is pursuing a very Chinese-style policy of government censorship. So Trudeau and Macron and Ardern met behind closed doors in Paris with social media companies to announce that they have persuaded most social media companies to crack down on their critics in the next election. Now, that's deeply troubling. We see purges of conservatives already from Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. But if you're purged from those companies, you're silenced, but you're still free. You don't go to jail, you're not fined, you're not dragged through a court system for years. And that extra edge, though, that punitive side, that embarrassing, time-consuming, grinding, psychological warfare side of Section 13, the prosecutions, that is what appeals to Trudeau and his Liberal Party. They don't deserve the name Liberal anymore, by the way. It comes from the Latin word for freedom. That's where Section 13 comes in. The left is generally happy when a conservative voice is silenced online. Sometimes leftists go the extra mile. They want them out of a job, or they boycott a company, or they harass someone's employer. But Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act would go further than any of this. It would expose any conservative voice to tens of thousands of dollars in fines and legal costs. And the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, it's a kangaroo court run not by real judges, but by non-judge activists. They have tremendous power to do weird and strange things that a normal court couldn't. I remember when I was prosecuted by the Alberta version of the Canadian Human Rights Commission, that Alberta version literally demanded, in writing, that I not only pay cash to a radical Muslim activist who was offended by me, but the Human Rights Commission actually demanded that I give him 2 full pages in the magazine that I published back then, unedited, for him to say literally whatever he wanted to say about me. I'm serious, that's actually what the Human Rights Commission demanded from me, that I give up 2 pages of my magazine to some Sharia law thug from Pakistan. No normal court would even think of that. That's so weird. But Human Rights Commissions aren't real courts. That's what this is about. It's not even about censoring people now. The social media companies do a pretty good job of censoring for Trudeau already. This is about humiliating conservatives, deterring conservatives, demonizing them, costing them money. It's really about vengeance for Trudeau. I won't get into all the procedural reasons it's built that way, but a few examples include the fact that unlike a civil lawsuit in a real court, in a human rights kangaroo court, the complainer doesn't have to pay for his own lawyer. Unlike a civil lawsuit in a real court, if you're wrongfully sued and you win, you don't get your costs paid by the false accuser. Unlike in a criminal lawsuit in real court, you don't have to be convicted beyond a reasonable doubt. Unlike a criminal lawsuit in real court, you have no legal aid help if you're poor. It's the worst of all worlds, these kangaroo courts. It's exactly what Justin Trudeau would love. I mean, think about it. He tried to let his criminal friends like SNC Lavalin off the hook, and he tried to convict innocent people like Vice Admiral Mark Norman. He couldn't get away with that in a real court. That's why I call these human rights commissions a kangaroo court. That's one reason why Harper shut down Section 13, and it's a big reason why hucksters like Trudeau like it. And the very offense itself, likely to expose a person to hatred or contempt. Give me one more reason on that, likely to. So maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. But it's all in the future, so you can't even say I didn't do it. No one said you did. You don't actually have to have done anything wrong to be guilty of it. Just maybe something in the future could happen, but you could be charged now. Expose a person to hatred or contempt. So by writing something on the internet, or making a video, or drawing a cartoon, or sharing something on Facebook, you could expose someone to the human feeling of hate. I'll admit it, when I was young and I saw the movie Schindler's List about the Holocaust, it gave me hard feelings towards Germany, or at least some Germans, or at least the Nazis. Does that make Schindler's List hate speech? Of course not. But is that movie likely to, as in maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, expose a person to hatred or contempt? Well, of course. Of course it could. That's an old example. How about a new example? There's a new movie out there right now called The Hate You Give. Title sort of gives it away, doesn't it? If you watch that movie and have some hard feelings, whoever made the movie is guilty of Section 13. Emotions are a natural part of the human personality. We're all a little bit different in that. In fact, I think that's the point of art and all communications, fiction, nonfiction, to cause an emotional response is part of being human. And not all emotions are comedies and laughter. Sometimes there are tragedies. Sometimes there are calls to action. Sometimes there are memorials. Watch the movie Killing Fields. Watch Apocalypse Now. Watch American Sniper. I watched that and I hated Al-Qaeda even more. How about you? Could a powerful piece of art or political commentary or even just a joke expose a person to feelings of hatred, of contempt by another person? Of course it could. In fact, without a doubt, since there's no way to measure hurt feelings or being offended, I should point out that truth is not a defense to Section 13. You can say something true that makes a person have hard feelings. In fact, the truth is much more enraging than fiction, isn't it? Fair comment is irrelevant. Religious belief is irrelevant. Simply being mistaken is irrelevant. The only test is, did you or didn't you say something that might in the future cause someone to have hard feelings about someone else? So of course this law had a 100% conviction rate for a quarter of a century on the books. There literally is no defense to it. Every one of us is guilty of this law every single day, unless we literally talk to no other human being ever. Every one of us does something that could maybe cause offense in the future. Of course, we're all guilty. It's just who's charged. So of course the Liberals want this back. And of course the lawyers and the bureaucrats want it back. Free money, free bureaucracy building, lots of power, free way to stick it to their enemies list. But what about Andrew Scheer? You know, when he ran for the leadership of the Conservatives and he eked out that razor-thin win on the final ballot, back then Scheer promised to fight for free speech, especially on campus, by the way. He sounded really good back then, but, you know, since then he's literally deleted that policy from his website. You can't find it. And he's gone wobbly out of fear of the media mob, fear that he'll be demonized too. During recent hearings on hate speech at the Liberal-run Justice Committee, Michael Cooper, a Conservative MP from St. Albert, dared to push back at the hateful assertion by a Muslim lobbyist that Conservatives were to blame for a mass murder in New Zealand. Now, Cooper pushed back, saying the terrorist in New Zealand himself denied that he was a Conservative, in fact said he admired Communist China. That's true, and it was a rebuttal to a false accusation.
Mr. Surrey, I take great umbrage with your defamatory comments to try to link conservatism with violent and extremist attacks. They have no foundation, they're defamatory, and they diminish your credibility as a witness.
But after the Liberals all claimed that they were offended, it's easy to say, isn't it? Andrew Scheer literally fired Cooper from the committee, saying it was inappropriate. Well, just say it, Andrew. Michael Cooper's words were likely to cause hatred or contempt. I mean, could be, right? And worse, and weirdly, Andrew Scheer ordered the remaining Conservatives on the committee to vote to turn off the video cameras when Mark Stein, Lindsay Shepherd, and John Robson testified at that committee. Understand how nuts that is. The Conservatives invited those public figures to testify. They invited them to come to Parliament, presumably to testify for free speech, and they showed up. They took time out of their days. And then, when they were all sitting in Parliament about to give their testimony, the Conservative MPs literally voted to turn off the cameras on them, so the world could not see them arguing for free speech. According to Andrew Lawton, our friend who was right there, the order to have these Conservatives vote against the cameras came from Scheer himself, to literally vote to turn off the cameras on their own witnesses they had invited. What is going on here? Why did Scheer's point person on the free speech battle literally cheer for Karina Gould in committee earlier this year, complimenting her on how sharp she looked and telling her she should go harder and faster on the censorship?
Minister, always lovely to see you. I love that necklace, by the way. That's just beautiful. So I'm asking you, please, if you are ready in regards to the social media platform, willing to make the hard decisions, to take the hard actions, and not 6 months from now, but now, please.
What is going on here? Why is not a single Conservative MP allowed to even talk about this issue? Why have they all been whipped? Why are they not just being passive, but actually voting to suppress free speech witnesses and calling for Karina Gould to go faster and harder on censorship? What is going on here? How is this possibly conservative? How does this possibly help the party politically? Forget about doing right and wrong. How does this help them win? Don't they have any sense of self-preservation, even knowing that all the people censored will be Conservatives, of course? Does Andrew Scheer think that if he is very, very quiet, the censorship tiger will devour him last? What is going on? How did the party of Stephen Harper which voted to repeal Section 13. Unanimously, they voted to repeal Section 13. How is that party now cheering, or at least standing quietly, for Trudeau to revive Section 13? Well, I guess because there was one man who did not vote to repeal Section 13, Andrew Scheer himself, who was Speaker of the House that day and thus didn't vote. What an irony. He was the man who, as Speaker, controls everyone else's freedom of speech in Parliament, the man who was effectively the judge of the court of Parliament, who could rule a word unparliamentary, who could demand an MP retract a statement. Maybe, just maybe, he fell in love with the power to regulate speech. He was called the Speaker, after all. If he himself could tell a Prime Minister or a Cabinet Minister, sit down and shut up and retract a word, I can imagine that would feel pretty powerful. I don't know, that's a theory. Can you come up with a better explanation? Maybe there's a simple theory that defending free speech isn't cool now like it was back in 2013. With the mean girls in the media party, that is the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, the CBC, the new junk websites like Huffington Post and BuzzFeed and Vice, they all hate free speech now for some reason because, well, I know the reason, because they know conservatives use free speech to get around the leftist mainstream media. So if Andrew Scheer were to stand up for free speech today, all those media reporters would attack him hard, much harder than Stephen Harper had to deal with back in 2013. In fact, back then, most media, at least grudgingly, supported Harper's move for free speech. Today, the same media party would love to censor any conservative because the media have become politically radicalized, but also out of their own business interests, they would love to silence online competitors, even us. So what about you? What about you, dear viewer? I know that most people who watch my shows are Conservative Party members. Some are Maxime Bernier supporters. I would ask you to sign a petition to Justin Trudeau to have him stop Section 13. But I know that, of course, Trudeau wouldn't listen. He'd throw it in the garbage. He doesn't listen to anyone. He loves censorship. He will bring it to law if he can. But what if I asked you to sign a petition not to the Prime Minister or to Karina Gould, but to Andrew Scheer himself, to ask him to take off the whip from his own MPs, to ask him to let his own MPs be true conservatives, or at least to speak their conscience, to allow them to stand up for freedom of speech? I'm not going to ask Andrew Scheer to let Michael Cooper back in. We know he won't. He has too much pride invested in that weird firing. But to stop Section 13 itself, a great effort by countless grassroots conservatives for years, finally convinced Stephen Harper and the Conservative Party to repeal it. It took years. And that repeal has stood for 6 years, and we're all the better for it. Don't let Stephen Harper's achievement be undone. Don't go quietly along with Justin Trudeau and Karina Gould. And don't, for God's sake, be an active participant in it by voting to turn off the cameras on Mark Steyn and Lindsay Shepherd and John Robson. So I've drafted a petition, but it's to Andrew Scheer. Look, I know he can't stop Section 13 on his own. He lacks the tools to do that. But if he and his MPs make a proper fuss about it and engage the remaining true journalists left in this country, and perhaps engage the larger civil society and use all the tools in their toolbox, like the remaining conservatives in the Senate, and use whatever rules of Parliament, maybe, just maybe, this awful decision by Trudeau to ram through censorship on the eve of the election could be stopped or even slowed down just to delay it till after the election. It could be done. I mean, Trudeau could still force it through for sure. He's got an absolute majority. But if Andrew Scheer made a big enough fuss, I think he could make this too costly for Trudeau, and Trudeau would abandon it, as he abandons many things that get tough to do. I think Trudeau could back down. I really believe that. But it won't happen if Andrew Scheer won't do it, and he's not doing it. The NDP loves Section 13. This is an emergency now. All of those freedoms will be washed away. Stephen Harper's achievement will be wiped out. So please sign our petition right now to Andrew Scheer. It's simple. You can see it at stopsection13.com. It simply says, we call upon Andrew Scheer to stand up for freedom of speech by opposing the revival of Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act. That's all it says. He promised he'd be for free speech when he ran for Conservative leader. The Conservative Party was unanimously for free speech under Stephen Harper. The country needs free speech. We need an opposition to oppose censorship. It's easy for him to do. if he's worried about what the country thinks, he'll be in good stead. Canadians like free speech, but these days, I'm worried that Andrew Scheer cares more about what the media party thinks than what Canadians think. Please sign our petition at stopsection13.com, and I will personally deliver it to Andrew Scheer myself. Go to stopsection13.com. That's an excerpt from the Ezra Levant show. Every day, I do a video monologue, and then I interview an interesting guest, and then I end by reading my hate mail. But you've got to subscribe to it, which you can do at therebel.media/shows.